morning. Myself Shravan, Assistant Professor from Department of Computer Science and Engineering from Ajay Kumar Garg Engineering College. My today's topic is web hosting, domain name, databases and programming languages. So basically, what is the meaning of web hosting? Why we are using that domain name and what is the purpose of that domain name, and how the web is going to handled by webmasters and web users. So basically, webmaster is a person who is handling all the tasks. So basic webmaster duty consists of maintaining the maintaining a site web page by checking it regularly, the file on the server and the databases. So when task to do this is a webmaster is expected to understand how website function, what web host services were being used, and what are the requirements for running the website. The website can be running using PHP, MySQL and Apache, or it can be on JavaScript as well as some JSP or other programming languages. So as a way of introducing you to webmastering, we start with the basic of web hosting, domain name, programming languages and databases. So the basic terms which we will use in these slides are: first is DNS. DNS means domain name system. It is hierarchical name system that serve as a phone book for internet by translating human friendly computer host name into IP addresses. Second term we will use domain name. So domain name provides a symbolic representation such as recognizable name to mostly numerical addresses, internet resources. So multiple IP addresses can be assigned to one domain name. That domain name serve as a name for particular IP address. Next term we will introduce to you, that is FTP. FTP is file transfer protocol for exchanging and maintaining file over TCP computer network. So FTP client can connect to an FTP server to manipulate file on that server. Next terminology we will discuss, that is ISP, Internet Service Provider. That is also called Internet Access Provider also. It is a company that offer its customer to access the internet. Next term we are going to discuss, that is URL. URL basically it names as Uniform Resource Locator that specify where a identified resource is available and the mechanism for retrieving it, and also known as web address. Next terminology is web server. Web server, it is either a software that serve as a platform on which web application can run, or a hardware from which web application or file can be accessed by other computer in the network. Next is the web host. So web host are companies that provide place or a space on the server they own for use by their client, as well as providing internet connectivity typically in the data center. Next term we are going to use is server-side scripting language. So server-side scripting language are example are ASP, ASP.NET, JSP, or we can say PHP. So their extensions are: for ASP we will use .ASP, for ASP.NET we will use ASPX, for Cold Fusion markup language we will use .CFM, for Java JSP we will use .JSP as an extension, and for PHP pages we will use .PHP extension. Next we are going to discuss the web server. At the most basic level, a server is a technology solution that serve files, data, print, fax, resources and other multiple computers. So the word server often refer to the specialized computer that the server software run on. So the server is optimized to perform services for other computer or clients. The client can be computer or other type of hardware devices like printer, fax or other devices that connect to the server. Here in this diagram, here we see that is a server. These are the host we are going users that are connect with the server via the internet. Next, we are talking about what the meaning of web hosting and how we are going to register the domain name. So for that thing, first we have to understand the basic terminology. See in this diagram here what we are going to see in this picture. The website we refer as a house. The hosting that is basically a land where the house is going to be built, and the domain name is the address that particular space we are going to use. So internet for newbies, it can be confusing for these three terminology. By this picture they are easily identified. So basically what we are going to say, the website, hosting and domain name. Site control is to manage the web hosting account, but customer need to speak. Some issues are there. For sales team, we have to provide particular to talk about the sales, about billing or technical, that is supported by the web hosting company. So everything else will be used with either web or on the email server and infrastructure administration. Next is web hosting. If I talking about the web hosting now, so web hosting at a core, web server serves static content to the web browser by loading a file from the disk and serving it across the network to the user's web browser. So the entire exchange is mandated by the browser and server taking to each other using HTTP. So some companies that own computer acting as web server often offer a web hosting services. So web hosting is a service that which allocates space for customer to showcase their website on computer that are connected to the internet 24/7. So next we are talking about type of web hosting. So there are numerous type of web hosting. First we are talking about the free web hosting. So free web hosting means free. Something is free. So once we are talking about the free, there is nothing free in this, but the hosting company will provide some advertisement support or other thing to showcase their to execute their plan. So that offer some limited services which are compared to the paid hosting. So what are the good thing about the free web hosting? That is good thing is low cost. It is free, good for family, hobby or personal sites can be used for hosting. Also free email is often an option during the free web hosting. In case of bad in case of bad thing about the free web hosting is no domain name, few and limited or no software option, limited security option, limited or no database support, and limited technical support provided by the web hosting company. Next, about the shared web hosting. If I talk about the shared web hosting, once website is placed on the same server as many other websites, ranging from few to 100 or 1,000. So typically all domains may share a common pool of server resources such as RAM and CPU. So that feature available with this type of service can be quite extensive. So a shared website may be hosted with the reseller. What good thing about the shared web hosting is it is low cost compared to dedicated web hosting. Cost is shared with others, so good for small business and average traffic. Multiple software options are available on domain name can be there. Good support can be provided by the customer support. If I talk about the bad thing about the shared web hosting, so as number of traffic is going to be increased, in that case restriction on the traffic volume, restricted on database volume, restricted on software support, that is major issues regarding the shared web hosting. And sometimes website can be slow due to heavy traffic, because number of shared websites are running on same server. Next, we are talking about the virtual dedicated server. So here in term of virtual dedicated server, the dividing a server into virtual server where each user feel like they are on their own dedicated server, but they are actually sharing a server with many of other users. So the user may have root access to their own virtual space. This is also known as virtual private server or VPS. So customer are something responsible for patching and maintaining the server. So the good thing about the virtual dedicated server is it is low cost as compared to dedicated server. Cost is shared with others because that is also one type of shared hosting. So good for small business and average traffic. Multiple software options are there. On domain name can be there. Good support for through the our customer support. But what are the bad thing about the virtual dedicated server is reduced security due to many sites on the same server, restriction on traffic volume, restriction on database support, and restricted on software support. It is something like your shared web hosting, but here space is virtually dedicated to each user. Next, we are talking about the dedicated web hosting. So in case of dedicated web hosting, if user gets his or her own web server and gain full control over it, so root access for Linux or administration using using Windows. So however, the user typically does not own the server. Another type of dedicated hosting is self-managed, or we can say unmanaged. So this is usually least expensive for dedicated plans. So user has full administrative access to the box, which means client is responsible for security, maintenance, and all kind of application. So good thing is it is basically used for large businesses or which have their own data to be private, like banking website, or you can say financial websites. So good for heavy traffic. Multiple domain names can be there, powerful email solutions can be there, powerful database support can be there, and unlimited software support is provided during the dedicated web hosting services. But what are the bad thing about the dedicated hosting is the cost involved during the launching and creating that web hosting. So it is expensive, required higher skill because manpower is required to create and maintain own dedicated box. So another kind of web hosting is co-location web hosting services, that is similar to the dedicated web hosting services, but the user on the server, the hosting company provide physical space that the server takes up and take care of the server. So this is the most powerful and expensive type of web hosting services. In most cases, co-location provide may provide little or no support directly from the client machine, provide only the electrical or you can say internet access and storage facility to the server. In most cases, the client would have his own administrator visit the data center on site or do the hardware upgrade or change. So what are the good thing about the co-location web hosting services is we can use high bandwidth, high uptime, high security, and unlimited software options are there. But something is bad about the colocation web hosting services, it is cost that is going to be involved with that particular web hosting services. It is expensive, require higher skill, and it is very harder to configure and debug. Another kind of web hosting services is reseller web hosting services, where which allow client to become web host themselves. Reseller could function for individual domain under any combination of these listed type of hosting, depending on who they are affiliated with and provider. So reseller account may vary tremendously in size. So they may have their own virtual dedicated server or co-located server. So many resellers provide a nearly identical services to the provider, share hosting plan, and provide technical support themselves. Another type of web hosting is managed web hosting services. So the user gets his or her own web server, but not allowed to full control on it, like root access for Windows or Linux. So however, they are allowed to manage their own data via FTP or other control management, remote management tools. So user is disallowed full control, so that the so that the provider can guarantee quality of service by not allowing the user to modify the server or potentially create configuration problem. So that user typically does not own their server, so server is leased to the client. Another kind of web hosting is cloud web hosting. So in case of cloud web hosting, that is not a proper web hosting, that is cloud hosting. The term is cloud hosting, not cloud web hosting. So unlike the hosting solution described above, cloud hosting service utilize the services of several servers that are clustered together. So this cluster of server is simply called the cloud. To enumerate cloud hosting, the service rely on virtual server that draw their computing power from the complex network of physical web server, or rather than being available as a product. So the concept behind the cloud hosting is that it is made available as a utility or service, much like utilities such as gas and electricity. So the people pay for only what they have to use. It can also be thought of extension of clustered hosting, wherein the website are hosted on multiple servers. So major difference here, cloud hosting use a vast network of servers that are situated in different locations and different data centers. So cloud hosting can be generally classified according to the two models. It can be either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. Under the internet infrastructure as a service, the client obtains the virtual hardware resources on which it become possible to install the software environment choice. On the contrary, the platform as a service comes bundled within the software environment. Typically, the solution stack include the operating system, programming support, database support, web server software, which means the web application can be developed and installed anywhere. So another kind of web hosting, it can be your clustered hosting, grid hosting, or home hosting. So in case of cluster, the cluster server, a perfect solution for high availability and dedicated hosting to creating scalable web hosting solution. In case of grid hosting, this form the distributed hosting where the server cluster act as a grid. Next, we talking about the specific type of web hosting. So in case of specific type of web hosting, there are specific tools for particular hosting. Like if we want to host our file, for specific file hosting, we will either use RapidShare or Mega Upload. If in case of image hosting, we use Flickr, PhotoBucket, or Picasa. For video hosting services, we use video YouTube or Vimeo. For blog hosting services, we use Blogger, WordPress, Zenga or Live. Then one-click hosting, we will use YouSendIt or we use Dropbox. If we are going for shopping cart software, we will use basket2go.net. No installation is needed. So basically, software is hosted and application use is rented out as a service. So next we are talking about the domain name and issues and how we are going to register it. So domain names are often referred as simply domains. So the domain name registrant are frequently referred as domain owners. So although domain name registration with registrar does not confer any legal ownership of the name, only an exclusive right of the use. So simply registering a domain name does not protect us to another company in another company file a trademark infringement claim. So if they hold a legal trademark, they can lose. We can lose our domain name and even find yourself liable for owner legal costs. So domain name are restricted to ASCII letter from small a to z and 0 to 9 digits and hyphen. So some other restriction in term of name, length and position of hyphen. So for example, difference between that is the URL. Complete URL is http www.example.net.index.html. Here the domain name is www.example.net. So registered domain name is example.net because www is the way to World Wide Web to define a web page. So HTTP specify the client tells the server which name to be used. This way the one server with one IP address can provide different site for different domain name. So for example, the server at a IP address 208.77.188.166 handle all the following sites, which are example.com, example.net and example.org. So part of domain name. So basically domain name is divided into different parts. So domain name is two or more parts. First, rightmost is top level domain. That is known as top level domain. Top level domain is .com. Here top level name is .com. If I talk about the next subdomain, the subdomain is the example.com. And next, host name refer to the domain name that has one or more associated IP addresses like www.example.com or example.com. Both domain name has a .com domain is not. So domain name can be divided into different parts. First is a generic level domain name that can be .com, .net, .org, .info, .biz, .name. That are the particular top level domain name. If I talk about the sponsor domain name, in that case .gov, .edu, .asia, .mobi, these are our sponsor domain name. Next, if I talk about the country level domain name, like this one, this one is our country domain, means IN represent India, .co.uk represent United Kingdom, .ph for Philippines, .us for USA. Next, second level domain name is the left of the top level domain name is second level. Here the second level domain name is this one. That is our second level domain name. If I talk about the other kind of unconventional use of top level domain name to make the part of website title, like this, like dl.ico.us or ma.gnolia.com. All these are subpart. Next, domain name registration info. Here we have to contact the administrator. So that is named as registrar, that is responsible for all kind of registration and billing, and as well as for technical information we have to provide. Next we have to talk about the technical contact. That function is assuring the conference of the configuration of the domain name with the requirement of the domain registry, and maintaining the domain zone record, also providing the continuous functionality of the name server, accessibility, and all these kind of things. So domain name registration info will include our billing contract as well as name server. So billing is responsible for billing invoice from domain name registrar, paying applicable fee, while the name server refer to the at least to authorize name server, that platform name resolution for the domain. If we are not automatically provide the registrar, the domain holder must specify the domain IP address of the server. So what is the meaning of why we are using subdomain? So subdomain other people refer as third level domain name, so no need to register here. We have to identify two different IP addresses on the same server. So it is also used to point different computer with the same information for load balancing. Also, the scalability of the domain allow the multiple subdomain to be created. It help in organizing information. Subdomain allow better hosting option as compared to the subdirectories. To how to register a domain name. So first we have to define our domain name for a particular domain name, and if that is okay, then we have to go to registrar, and first we have to specify the space and as well as domain for particular we have to register name for that year. The paying fees for a year or up to a 10-year for renewal of that particular domain name. It is our choice to find that domain name. So most popular top domain may cost higher than less used one. So go check out the pay your domain name. That can be either PayPal or credit card. Edit your account at the domain registrar site to reflect the domain name server. To point your domain name, the domain name server are to be provided by your web host and need to be help translate numerical IP addresses to human readable domain name. So what are the domain name server? Name server do two things all day long. They accept request from program to convert domain name into IP address. Also they accept request from other name server to convert domain name into IP addresses. Also when a request come in, the name server can do four things with it. First, it can answer the request with IP address because it already know the IP address for the domain name. Second, it can contact other name server and try to find the IP address for the name requested. It may have to be multiple time. If it can say, I don't know the IP address for the domain name request, here the IP address for the name server know more than I do. So it can return an error message because the requested domain name is not valid or does not exist. So what are the server requirement? Server requirement that can be either Apache for Unix, Linux, or IIS server. So multiple websites like PHP, HTML to serve web pages for dynamic site, and need created database using the MySQL, PHP and MySQL to go hand in peanut butter for the jelly.